Yeah, I guess let's get right into it. He said before he hesitated and paused. Let's get right into it. Give you a second. Okay.
Today we're going to talk about capitalism and how we love it.
Yeah.
Best economic system ever devised by man.
There can never be better. Nothing to improve upon.
That is true.
Preach.
He walked out in the gray light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world. The cold, relentless circling of the intestate earth. Darkness implacable. The blind dogs of the sun in their running. The crushing black vacuum of the universe. And somewhere 200 animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it.
And lo, for the earth was empty of form, and void, and darkness was all over the face of the deep, and we said, look at that fucker dance.
All right. Welcome to Heat Death of the Universe, a podcast about burning Antony Blinken in effigy while feigning Havana syndrome to get laid. I wonder how that would work. It's just a weird sentence I wrote while you were going to the bathroom.
Oh.
I don't know why. Today is Friday, November 19th, 2021, year of our Lord. Jakarta is coming. It is 10:01 a.m. It's early. It's an early one. That is standard Korean time. Korea Standard Time, actually, KST. And in the weather report, it's 56 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little cloudy where I'm sitting. How about you with the traffic and the weather over there?
There's construction out my door. I hate it.
Oh man, that's the worst kind of weather, construction weather.
It's raining men. Construction men. Raining hard hats. Cranes. Cranes are dropping from the sky. I'm not talking about birds.
I'm not talking birds here. I'm talking machinery here. I don't know why I keep doing this, like a verbal tick. The New York guy who's walking here. I can't stop doing it lately these days, and doing it badly, I'll add.
When I worked at Johnny Brusco Pizzeria, I always did a dumb New York accent for some reason. When I was making pizzas.
It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Funny.
It's fun to badly do for some reason.
It is.
Speaking of things that are fun to do badly, let's see. Running the largest empire the world's ever seen, perhaps. We're still talking about, and this is the final time, we'll be discussing the book The Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins. We're in the final third of the book, and I guess let's just get into it. I don't recommend, I guess, listening to this episode unless you listen to the previous part 2 and part 1 episodes, I guess.
But I mean, you can if you want to.
You can. I'm just saying. There's a lot of context that...
if you're one of those people that doesn't like sequential things.
Sure.
Go for it.
Yeah, do it backwards.
You read your books backwards. You listen to your podcast backwards. You don't even just listen to our voices backwards. And then you piece together what we're saying as like a little puzzle, because what else are you going to do with your time other than listen to things backwards and write down the backwards words and flip them forwards and then like slowly work through it like you're decoding a secret language, because every other hobby has become trite and boring for you.
Or you're just a really big fan of Memento who's taken things way too far in their real life. Also, I remember when we did our last marathon film franchise viewing, whatever it's called, we mentioned the idea of how it would be funny if someone did listen to it backwards, because, we're watching like 6 movies in a row, getting like weird, more loopy and exhausted as time goes by, and to like see the reverse of that could be kind of funny. Speaking of that, this is going to be a first. If you want to hear that most recent film commentary series, besides the 2 free episodes, go to our Patreon. I may cut this out. I suddenly feel embarrassed saying it. Okay.
It's okay. We have one of those. If you want to go to it, it's fine. If you don't,
I remember we threatened, like, don't make us become the podcast that brings up the Patreon in the beginning of the episode. Anyway.
Whatever. Fuck it.
Okay.
So this is the last death of the universe. Wait, that's not her name. What's her name?
I already said all that shit.
Oh, shit. I wasn't listening, man. I was just thinking about how it's raining cranes.
Yeah, I said it before the raining cranes part. Okay. Let's hop in here. We're on chapter 9 now, called Jakarta is Coming.
Mm-hmm.
And here...
Who's Jakarta?
Listen, this is why I said the whole thing about listen to the first 2 episodes, because I don't want to explain this whole book at the beginning of each version or iteration, whatever. Jakarta is Coming. So, okay, I will say, so one of the big themes of the book is that the two conflicts and nations that the author here thinks played maybe the most important roles in the Cold War era and like shaping the world coming out of it were in Indonesia. That's where Jakarta is, and Brazil. And so at the beginning of this chapter, he starts kind of discussing the 2 countries and how they kind of relate to each other, and how after the coup in 1964 in Brazil and the massacre of 1 million innocent, like, defenseless people in Indonesia in 65 and 66 that led to a coup there. Again, both leading to just permanent dictatorships working directly with, and I think pretty obviously for, the United States intelligence agencies and economic interests. Yeah, so there are 2 just like very well-established military dictatorships by this point in the story in the mid-60s. This this is going to keep spreading. Like eventually we see that this spreads to the Philippines. Similar kind of thing happens there. And in South America, it really spreads like wildfire, kind of at the behest of both Brazil and the United States. Brazil is like in its own way become a sort of like a like, at least by comparison to the U.S., like a mini imperialist nation,
A little brother.
yeah, and they're everything they do is aligning with U.S. interests, and it's not a coincidence. I'll just put it that way.
They trained them well.
Yeah, and yeah, I think at one point in the book it talks about Nixon saying like how much he loves the brutal military dictatorship of Brazil, and he says something to the effect of like where Brazil goes, South like Latin America will follow, and he's just really proud of what the U.S. has done with Brazil, turning it into this just flat out military dictatorship. I mean, there's not even the pretense of democracy there. And you know, anyone who's perceived remotely as left wing is oftentimes disappeared, as it's called, which usually means tortured and killed. And it's just there are just these campaigns of terror that go on for decades. And
now we call it disappearing, ghosting.
Jesus. Yeah. While I was reading this, I was actually like sometimes getting confused between like, wait, didn't this happen in Indonesia? Didn't this happen in Brazil? Didn't this happen in
all
Chile?
Happening everywhere. It was like a playbook, right?
Yeah, but the playbook is so, it's just so much. I mean, it's so similar. Like, I guess just more than I even expected. I knew like there's this Jakarta method or Operation Jakarta, this sort of like you said, playbook of how to like the things that they have in common are torture, disappearing, massacring, also applying so much like disinformation and propaganda and like you know in like government owned like newspapers and radio and things like that. But then also what was I gonna say? Fuck, there was something else. Anyway, I'm sure it will come back to me later. But yeah, just a lot of overlap, like to the point where I was like, because there's, as we've probably commented on like the last 2 episodes about this book, like it's fairly information dense, and maybe these last 4 chapters are a little less dense than the previous 8, but there's still a lot of like names and stories of like different countries to keep in mind, but they're so similar that yeah, I was finding myself having to like stop and like get my bearings, be like, okay, we're talking about Brazil still, right? Okay, because it just sounds so similar in each country. Like the playbook really is pretty identical. Like, oh, the thing I blanked on was right wing terrorists. I'll just call them what they are. These military dictatorship regimes just committing crimes and then pinning them on like leftist groups as justification for then further like purging and marginalizing and arresting and disappearing and doing all this horrible shit to anyone that they can conveniently say is a communist or a potential communist. That becomes part of the language too, even. But let's see. So that's kind of the basic beginning of this chapter. Yeah, is it's just showing the overlap of of Brazil and Indonesia, I guess, and how they're like the perfect.
They're like becoming leaders in Asia and South America for how a country should behave in this U.S. dictated world, right?
Yeah, and like, Indonesia is doing it, is stepping outside of itself less than Brazil. Like, Brazil is really meddling with all its like neighboring countries, and it ends up like basically putting helping at least to establish military dictatorships in several of them, like when all is said and done. The big one we're going to get to that I'm most interested in talking about, at least, is what happened in Chile. But let's see here. There's an interesting point here early on where we go back to this character, Francisca, and I think eventually she and her family flee Indonesia, obviously because of this massacre, and she goes to the Netherlands. And let's see. The book says it basically talks about how in Europe, like, Europeans were much more free to like show interest in left-wing politics without being like murdered outright. And the book here reads, "It was very clear to Francisca why Europeans were allowed to experiment with social democracy and even communist politics, while her country had been taken away from her forever. Quote, racism, very simply. White Europeans are offered tolerance and sympathetic treatment while we are not." And I thought that it was an important point, which is that, well, yes, like there was like the Red Scare and there were like anti-communist sort of sentiments, like it was a
racist thing.
It wasn't illegal to be a communist in America. Like, I mean, some people would have liked to make it illegal, but like you still had that basic freedom to express your politics, right? Even though it was like just, you were still like pretty marginalized, but like it was nothing like if you I forget, I see, this is me, like the overlap of all the different countries, but one of these places, I don't know if it was Indonesia or where, but they literally banned the use of sickles because of the symbolism of the hammer.
I remember
and sickle.
that.
Yeah, like you couldn't use, like farmers using a sickle could be like just strung up or whatever, disappeared, just murdered. Like there's so
Was
much.
that like Trimans or Trimez? The place that Bali was like not Bali, Indonesia was interfering with. I'm not sure though. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd have to look it up again. I know what you're talking about. I remember that too.
Yeah, I just don't remember where it was, but it was in somewhere akin to somewhere that was utilizing the Jakarta plan. We'll say, like, whether it was Indonesia or Brazil, I just can't remember because I guess I didn't write it down, but so I mean the whole point of this is saying that like a lot of what the U.S. and the Western coalition sort of powers were doing to the global South in the name of anti-communism, they could have why weren't they doing that in other countries that happen to be predominantly white? And yeah, and I mean, as Francisca says here, it's like it's just racism. I mean, that's not the whole reason. I mean, right? Like there's a stew of reasons why the U.S. is meddling in all these other countries, and some are economic, some are just ideological, some are just about establishing
dominance.
Yeah, imperial power. Period. But yeah, it says here, why did Cold War Washington let Western Europe, quote, get away with all this light socialism when similar policy orientations led to violent intervention in the Third World? Was it only that, as Francisca said, Americans simply trusted their European cousins who were white and therefore responsible to handle the task of managing democracy? A complementary explanation might be that these countries, some still overseeing remnants of colonial empire, were incredibly rich and powerful. They were much harder to push around, even if Washington had wanted to. And perhaps more importantly, they sat at the top of the world economy. They were being fully integrated into the U.S.-led system, and so there was much less of a risk they would try to radically reshape the global order because it had served them quite well. So that's the in addition to, you know, the rock bottom, like, racist reality, is that it's like, oh yeah, well, these poor countries were like, yeah, masses of people are poor and like have shown that left-wing ideas are very popular to them. We can't let that take off because that will possibly become a successful socialist state. So we've got to like fucking strangle it in the crib now. But like in, say, France, sure, you can have your left-wing intellectuals because you guys are never gonna fucking have a revolution. Because, like, you guys are a comfortable enough nation to where you're going to, like, stick with the status quo. And, you know, so that makes a lot of sense to me as well. I mean, it's horrible, but it still makes sense. And then, yeah, we just, I mean, a lot of this, again, is just detailing the really, like, sick cruelty, the details, the grotesque details of how these military dictatorships maintain power. And like I said, it's a lot of disappearing of people, just outright like torture, like horrendous torture. God, I don't know if do you remember the part where, again, like now I'm forgetting where it was even, but the military like kidnapped someone who was like a suspected communist basically, and like put a bag over his head. They like electrified his genitals. They were just like beating the shit out of him. And then like in some weird like retaliatory reaction, this guy started like literally, it's really gross, but I mean, he started like scraping off his own skin, and he like basically freaked out these torturers to the point where they like left the room and like told him he could like take off the hood when he heard the door close. And I don't know if they actually finish what happened with that story. I can't imagine it ended well for that guy, but I don't know, that part really like jumped out to me. Like it was like it was described as like he was like peeling parts of himself off of himself. Like I don't know, it was very just a lot of intense shit like that. But I guess we don't need to like
Yeah, no, there was like really terrible stuff throughout the whole thing.
Actually, I just found the part here, but
Really?
yeah.
I feel like the next chapter even goes into some even worse stuff, but
Yeah, it's true. Oh yeah, chapter 10 is just like murder. The chapter is just like, look at all the places where people have been, murdered for no reason, and American government gives the thumbs up, big old thumbs up. So the guy I was talking about, I mean, just to be clear now, was in Brazil, and I should mention the Brazilian dictator at the time, Medici. I hope I think I'm saying his name correctly. Yeah,
Daisy?
yeah, he's the dictator of Brazil by like the 70s. But it says also that they learned about the electric shock to the genitals thing from the U.S. and French governments. By the way, but we kind of go full circle here, because in the beginning of the book we mentioned how Brazil had elected the first woman president, and then she was like booted out for like dubious reasons and eventually replaced by the hard right lunatic Bolsonaro. And her name Rousseff, Dilma Rousseff. She also testified about how before she was president in like 1970, somewhere around there, it says that they tortured her for weeks, hanging her upside down from a stick in a technique known as the parrot's perch, beating teeth out of her head and applying electric shocks.
Yeah, I remember reading that part and being really disgusted by it.
Yeah.
Especially the beating teeth out of her head part, which I can't imagine.
So the person who I was describing before is named Paulo Coelho. That's the best I can say it. Sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing. I don't know these Portuguese, Spanish, Indonesian names throughout the book. He's a now famous author, so he did survive this. But yeah, he's the one who described like scratching off his own skin in desperation while he was being tortured, and he like actually frightened.
He frightened them, and they let him go, right? Because it's like
that's what it seems like. And he said like when he took the hood off of his head, but he was in a soundproof room and there were bullet holes all over the walls. It's just like, this is like shit. Like, I mean, it's almost like straight out of like a fucking torture porn movie. Like, I know that sounds like kind of like a stupid comparison, but like, it's just like that level of like inhumanity, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, except obviously it's worse. It's not a fucking movie. Anyway, so an important turn in is Chile. In Chile, a man named Salvador Allende, he was like he was like a moderate leftist. Like he wasn't a communist. I don't think he even referred to himself as a Marxist or anything, but he was like to the left of the center, and he was elected president like legitimately, but before he was even elected, the CIA was like monitoring this situation really hard, and the CIA financed a scare campaign. Everyone's favorite vampire, Henry Kissinger, he approved the use of hundreds of thousands of dollars for a political warfare mission. Quote, I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people. God, what an arrogant fucking thing to say. God, I hate these fuckers. Ugh. Nixon, Kissinger, fucking just into the ocean with them. So yeah, the CIA just like they hugely funded this like scare propaganda mission in Chile, and there was a CIA run newspaper called El Mercurio, a right wing paper. They put up posters, pamphlets, they painted walls, and one of the things that you start seeing all around is Jakarta is coming. But yeah, Allende, I mean, he was a socialist, I should say. I retract what I said about him not being a Marxist, but he was like he was like more of a gradualist. Like he was more he wasn't a Castro or a Che Guevara, or it certainly wasn't a Stalin. And like Stalin himself, like we mentioned throughout the book, was like warning Allende and he warned other leaders that were to the left to like
drop it,
drop it, or like just don't provoke America, and like just like take it easy. Basically, like he's not saying like go become right wing, but he's saying like basically like
a bit crazy right now.
Be careful, like. Take the gradualist, like social democratic reforms first, kind of thing. Don't wave your guns in the air, screaming, you know, we're overnight becoming a communist country. But the thing is this Allende guy didn't want to do that anyway. He was like he was kind of like a soft intellectual type, is what I've gathered, because I mean, it describes him as like, he's like an intellectual who enjoyed sipping red wine in silk tweed jackets. All right,
doing that too.
Here's the thing I was trying to sum up. I got it right in front of me here. Silk tweed jackets. He admired Fidel Castro and considered him a close friend, but he thought the Chilean road to socialism would be very different. He'd work within the system and take advantage of a Cold War truce between Washington and Moscow, which he thought opened up space for La Via Chilena, the peaceful Chilean way to socialism. But
so it's like the Squad.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But of course,
I always want that way to work. I really do. Sometimes I think that it doesn't, though. That you have to go more of the Che route. That's a whole other thing.
That's a big part that comes up, I think, at the end of the book. I think in chapter 12, maybe, or 11 or 12, somewhere like when the talks about interviewing like the people that lived through all of this shit, like in the present day. And I guess that was like there were a lot of big like debates like that between different factions on the left, and and I mean,
still going on from what I understand.
Yeah, but it's like from the context of like, yeah, you won America, you won Brazil, like you won capitalism, you guys really won, and like piled our bodies high. So it's like the people who were kind of advocating a more vigilant or a militaristic approach sort of feel like vindicated, like, see, we told you, like, but I think even if there had been like more aggressive fighting on the from the left side, that
it would have caused more problems.
It would have been put down as well. I mean, that's what's so frustrating about this is like it doesn't matter. Like you can be peaceful like Allende and like want to work within the system, etc. And Richard Nixon still wants to crush you like a bug. He still hates your guts because you're not capitalist enough. You're not serving the interests of America enough. and that's what happened. I mean, essentially, is so yeah, the CIA is heavily involved in Chile, and Brazil is also heavily involved in helping to create like a right-wing movement in Chile to take out Allende and any sort of nascent left-wing like beginnings there. And there's this thing, the CIA has this called their like two-track approach after this was before Allende still even became president. He was still waiting in 1970. And track one was political warfare, economic pressure, propaganda, and diplomatic maneuvers. The CIA just tried to just outright bribe Chilean politicians and to terrify the population. Now I'm reading right from the book. If all that failed, they would condemn Chile to utmost deprivation and poverty, Ambassador Edward Corey told Kissinger, hopefully forcing Allende to adopt the harsh features of a police state. They wanted Allende to abandon democracy. See, this is the sick playbook stuff, is they're like, okay, like, let's try to like push people into like doing shit that will let us justify just destroying them
methods or whatever. Yeah.
And then if they don't actually respond the way we want, well, then we just like do a false flag operation and kill a bunch of soldiers or whatever and say that the left did it. And who's going to tell us otherwise? And that's usually like how these things work out.
Do you think we still do that?
We still do track one stuff, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I know.
I think because I think some things are different from this era nowadays. I think it is more like a lot of stuff is more that first track approach that like, because you can like
things are more public now, so they're like less likely to
just massacre people. Yeah. But we were saying before I hit record, we hit record like in Nicaragua, like the U.S. completely backed a coup attempt just 3 years ago there, and I mean it was put down, it was failed, but yeah, I think nowadays a lot of the power is just wielded through sanctions, trade embargoes, and definitely propaganda. But like, yeah, I think economic pressure is like in some ways just as, if not even more effective than terrorizing people with murder and disappearances and stuff. Because I mean, they kind of amount to the same thing depending on how targeted and severe the sanctions are. I mean, the last estimate I saw about like Yemen was that like U.S. sanctions on Yemen have starved about 500,000 people at least. So that's the kind of shit that sanctions can do. But the track 2 was a military coup. So this is just like the outright, like, okay, we'll give a bunch of guns and money to right-wing military people and train them and have them just, take over the government. And in Chile, there was a group called... God, I wish I could pronounce fucking Spanish type, Portuguese type words. Let's call them the PYL. Anyway,
PYL?
they're an anti-communist terrorist group known for its hideous geometric spider logo and sympathies with fascism. So the U.S. just starts funding them in Chile, and they're going to be like the hard right group there. And
excellent.
So at this time though, one of the big obstacles for America's and I guess also Brazil's interests in, purging Chile of leftism and installing a right-wing dictatorship was that the head of their military at the time, Rene Schneider, see, that's a word I can say. It's very German. Commander-in-chief of the Chile's armed forces. He was a constitutionalist, so he believed that the military should never overstep its constitutional role. He basically he refused to be a part of a military coup.
I see.
And it to the point where it pissed off the CIA so much they gave it a name. They called it the Schneider Doctrine, which meant when a military officer won't just do what we say. And
when a military officer's like, wait, no, this isn't what I stand for.
You want
principles. They have principles.
You want me to kill my president? Sorry, I'm not interested in that.
You want me to kill our people?
Yeah, our own people, not to mention. So this means that the CIA and all of these right-wing conspirators were like, okay, we gotta kill this guy. We just gotta kill him. So this is where the CIA has one of its classic whoopsie-doopsie blunders on my birthday, no less. October 25th, 1970, group of armed men tried to kidnap him and killed him in the process. Whoops! The plan was to blame the whole thing on left-wing Allende supporters and therefore provide the justification for an anti-communist military coup. But it backfired. So, the people of Chile were like, what the hell? The head of our armed forces just got murdered. So basically, this slowed down the inevitable coup, I guess. Because the guy who replaced Schneider as the head of the military also was of the same belief of I don't want to be a part of a coup. And so again, this is total playbook shit, right? This is how everything began in Indonesia. This is how everything began in Brazil. You kill a couple military officers, blame it on the left, and then let the fucking massacre begin. Except it didn't quite go that way yet in Chile, but we'll get there. So eventually, Allende is not stopped. He becomes president now, and of course the description of it was it's so it's so sad to read because you know what's coming. But it talks about how happy everybody was when he won. I think this was another kind of central character that I think that the author based a lot of interviews on. Carmen Hertz. She was young and part of a leftist group called the MIR. It says that the people felt euphoric. She said it was fantastic. Like everyone else, we flooded the streets. When Allende's victory was announced, Carmen remembers. When we finally came home, we were full of hope and joy, even spiritual ecstasy. They had done it, and they would do it, Carmen remembers. I was convinced, just like everyone I hung out with, that we were going to change the world. Allende was a believer in the Third World movement, and many of his supporters believed that global revolution was imminent and would be led by the global South. Not long after Allende took power, Chile joined the non-aligned movement and became increasingly active in Third World organizations. It also goes against this thing I mentioned before, but it says Fidel Castro advised Allende against picking a fight with Washington, as did economist Orlando something. Sorry, can't read these names. A member of the so-called elegant left. But basically he said, like, don't be too revolutionary, like I already kind of said. And then that's the reason Fidel didn't attend Allende's inauguration, because he didn't want to make it look like Allende was more radical than he was. By being there. And it makes an important point here that, again, like, when America, like, a lot of the justifications against communism at the time, especially, were like, well, the Soviets are our, like, sworn enemy, and like any country where communism spreads is basically in cahoots with the Soviet Union, which Chile was not. Like, they like Stalin. Well, it wouldn't have been Stalin at this point, but like the Soviet Union, like, really kept its distance from Latin America generally. And it says in the book here that they viewed Latin America as Washington's sphere of influence. And they maintained the orthodox view that revolution should progress gradually in the Western Hemisphere. So, like, for them, they're like, for us, we can we can rush headlong into, like, formal communism and everything will be fine. I don't know. Let's wait and see 20 years. But anyway.
It was fine, right?
Oh, yeah. It worked out great.
Good.
Anyway, the point is that like the U.S. doesn't really care about the Soviet influence, really, like, because they know it's not even there. What they want, and I should just get to the point here. It's Nixon literally says at some point, like, we can't, if Chile is, like, allowed to succeed.
We can't let people see a different model than America working.
Yeah, that would be the most disastrous thing of all, basically.
That's the big problem with Cuba. Even now, I feel like that's the big problem with Cuba.
Oh, it's the reason, like, we will not stop the fucking embargo. Like, every year, the United Nations has a resolution to drop the embargo, and every year only 2 countries vote against it, which means they don't have to do it because it has to be unanimous, and that's the U.S. and Israel. Every other country,
there's no reason for it to be there.
Yeah, because they don't.
Especially when, like, Cuba, I don't know, they, from what I understand, do a ton of volunteer work in the world.
They do. They do. They're kind of
have, like, some of the best doctors in the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Kind of famous for sending out, like, pretty good medical care to other countries, especially during, like, crises. But Operation Jakarta, basically, it becomes clear that what the right wing movement in Chile is planning is a massacre, and there's just direct evidence of this. Like, there's people in the Navy talking about how the plan was to kill 10 to 20,000 people just, like, outright, like, in a day, and that would be all it would take to, like, that'd be all it would take, quote unquote, to just take over, get rid of the, purge the communists, and bring in a strong-armed single dictator, because that's what you want. That's what we want. That's America, always standing up for military dictatorships around the globe, never for pure actual democracy. So, I don't know. Like, basically, by the time, it was September 11th in 1973 when the coup actually happened in Chile, and they installed Pinochet. It's a famous name I haven't said yet. Augusto Pinochet. And he would end up remaining, like, the dictator for quite a long time. I don't remember exactly the year. And he was horribly brutal. And yeah, he and the right-wing military coup killed thousands and thousands of people just in the initial, like, coup, not to mention throughout the the rule over the country. So again, playbook, really the same kind of playbook there. And yeah, when they stormed, like Allende ended up killing himself, like as the capital city was being like bombarded,
Raided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He left like one last radio message to the people, and then like took himself out. You know,
That's how I'll do it too.
You know, democracy. That's how democracy
I know.
works.
Fuck.
Why don't we move on to the next chapter? That's basically chapter 9. Is like,
Yeah, that's basically
what happened to Chile, and it's just this disease of Jakarta method based purging of fanatical anti-communist movements. I mean, I almost don't even want to call it anti-communist. I'd rather just call it fascist. These are just pro-fascist regimes.
Yeah.
Which by definition is anti-communist. But like, anyway, what's up with chapter 10? Back up north.
Okay, the next chapter is chapter 10. Back up north. And in this chapter, we start to see what's going on, I guess, in like Indonesia and the rest of Southeast Asia. Cambodia, Vietnam.
Yeah, I think it kind of globe hops a little bit, because I think
East Timor.
I think they're still talking about South America as well too, and Central America.
Oh yeah, you're right. It does. So the first part really of chapter 10 focuses more on Cambodia, and just wait. Okay, so the Vietnam Wars came to a close. We lost. We're not happy about losing the Vietnam War at all, for some reason. And we're also trying to make sure that, like, Cambodia does not become a communist country, right? So we... So we we're dropping. Where's my nose? We end up dropping bombs on Cambodia, right? So it was something. The book says the United States dropped 3 times the tonnage on Cambodia that fell on Japan during World War II, atom bombs included, and it talks about the people who survived. The effects of the B-52s on those nearby were reminiscent of the Sufatos in Guatemala. The terror was complete. One lost control of bodily functions as the mind screamed incomprehensible orders to get out, one of the Vietnamese officials remembered. And this chapter, this is one of the opening, acts of horror, cruelty in the chapter. This chapter just, kind of documents a lot of just terrible things happening, I guess, throughout these nations that the United States, quote unquote, liberated from communism. And it talks about the dirty war, which I'll get to in a minute, but from 1975 to 1979, while Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter sat in the White House, Indonesia Armed Forces, Washington's closest ally in Southeast Asia, annihilated up a third of the population of East Timor, which was the highest percentage, a higher percentage than those who died under Pol Pot in Cambodia, which was a couple of chapters ago, right?
They talk about Pol Pot, I think, in this chapter.
I thought they talked about him also in chapter 8. It doesn't matter, I guess.
I just remember there's I was gonna say that the funny thing about Pol Pot is you know who liked Pol Pot? The U.S. government. Yeah, we were not happy when Vietnam actually was the one who put down Pol Pot's movement. Anyway, I just remember thinking, oh, yet again, on the right side of history. Good job, America.
What else was going on?
It really globe hops a lot around in this chapter.
So it's globes hops back to like Portuguese and even like Brazil. I remember the next thing that like really got to me after we like leave Cambodia and Vietnam. I'll go back to them in a second. We're in like Brazil, and it's talking about like while the Jakarta operation's going on, and the and it was intensifying. That a beloved journalist named Vladimir Herzog was one of its few victims. Like, Herzog was this popular newsman journalist, and he operated very openly. He wasn't like a big fan of the USSR, but he was like I guess a democratic socialist is kind of what it says. He had been inspired by Alexander Dubček's, how do you say that guy's name? Socialism with a Human Face in Czechoslovakia. He joined the Brazilian Communist Party in the early 70s, and the PCB was like pursuing a moderate path, building a united democratic front, one of the most organized groups opposing the dictatorship in Brazil at the time, along with parts of the Catholic Church. And in like October 75, Herzog became the editor-in-chief of the public station TV Cultura. A right-wing journalist called the station TV Viet Cultura because of his communist infiltration, right? But then, as with many of these leftist, on October 25th, 1975, Herzog was called for questioning by the Brazilian army. And that's when he went into the military offices voluntarily. He never came out.
I bet they sent him on a nice vacation, right?
Yeah, they sent him on a world tour.
To a farm upstate.
To the ocean. Or farm upstate. But, yeah. No one in Brazil bought the official version of the story that he had killed himself, even though there were grisly photos of his body slung too close to the ground for a hanging to be effective. The dictatorship claimed even more patently offensive, and his the photos of him obviously being murdered made the dictatorship's claims just offensive, because like they said he killed himself, but the photos said something very different, right? And his death actually galvanized Brazil into protest. Influential members of the Catholic church hierarchy took up the cause of Herzog's death and trained increasingly harsh critiques on the military regime. Instead of escalating Brazil's internal war, the Jakarta operation had backfired, and it forced the military to back off. So, like, killing this journalist, really rallied the people and rallied the church, which got the military to back off some, despite the wishes of some hardline elements. Gazelles, Abertura continued. And then Brazil started to slide little by little away from its more hardline anti-communist neighbors. So this is when Brazil starts to actually move to more of, what are the democratic sort of system? Not that it's... And then it starts to talk about Chile's Operation Condor. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think Brazil maintains a military dictatorship, though, still for quite a while after this. I can't remember when actual elections came back, but I want to say it's not until like the late 80s or even early 90s. But I should probably look that up. But I see, like, your point is right, that like their Jakarta style tactics, like they have to kind of back off from that a bit because there's just too many people too outraged by the killing of this journalist. And I was gonna say that when they released the photo of his body, like so obviously staged poorly, like to look like he hung himself, that's like the same thing as the like, oh, he died of suicide, 2 shots to the back of the head. It's like almost just as obvious. But yeah, anyway, that's just a little snarky comment I wanted to throw in there.
No, it's fine. And
but like, so in Chile, things are still going like hard, right? It's
yeah,
like,
Chile Operation Condor starting, and I think this period is like the book says the period's often called the Dirty War, and it also says this is sort of like somewhat incorrectly because there was no war. It was like a top-down anti-communist extermination campaign.
Yeah.
With ideological roots in Argentina's homegrown fascist movement, the Subversives.
You know what I realized, like from reading this book, or sort of re-realized, there's always that idea of like, and it's not just an idea, like this really did happen, but the Nazi, like commanding officers who fled to you always hear they fled to South America. I'm pretty sure where they fled specifically was Argentina. I think Argentina has a bit of a Nazi problem, a bit of a fascist problem, because there was also like there were obviously I left out some stuff from the last chapter, but like I should mention like the same exact shit happened in the Philippines. And the same stuff was going on in Argentina, like basically all around the same time. These like anti-communist purges, and then bringing in like a strong-armed right-wing fascist leader. But
so like during this anti-communist extermination campaign, which is a better name for it than a dirty war, subversives, blah, blah, blah. I can talk. Subversives, people who were perceived as communist, were tortured and killed for their real and perceived communism, for their real or perceived atheism, for their real or perceived Jewishness. There goes with your Nazi thing. Mm-hmm. Or just for union activities, because fuck unions, as I always say. So, don't worry.
Or for being left-handed. They just killed left-handed people, too.
The good guys at Ford Motor Company and Citibank, I used to work for Citibank, God, that was the worst job I ever had, collaborated with the disappearances of union workers. Even beards were suspect. Oh. That's why a Brazilian piano player named Tino Rhino, that's probably completely wrong, Tino Rhino. Oh, God, I don't... Okay.
It's all right, I don't know.
Spelled.
Reno is probably how I would say it, no. But I have no idea.
Tino Reno.
That's still probably wrong.
He had a beard, so he was brought in, thrown in a grill for torture in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, like a grill, like something like the thing you put like fucking grill. Hamburgers on.
Yeah, a perilla. I said a grill, but yeah, a grill.
Well, I think parrilla is just the Portuguese word for grill, probably.
Yeah.
Or Spanish word, whatever. Yeah.
And the Admiral Emilio Massera, he declared Argentina was fighting a third world war between dialectic materialism and idealistic humanism. This meant removing the influence of Marx as well as Freud. Oh God damn it, Freud and Freud. God, fucking hate
You
myself.
said it right the first time, man. Relax. Yeah.
I didn't feel like I did. And Albert Einstein. I hate that guy.
Einstein?
I hate that guy. Yeah, Einstein, yeah. This meant removing the influence of Marx, Freud, and Albert Einstein. And the General Antonio Domingo explained how this worked. This quote gets to the root of like how all this is going down. First, we will kill all subversives. Then we will kill all of their collaborators. Then those who sympathize with subversives. Then we will kill those that remain indifferent. And finally, we will kill the timid.
Jesus Christ. That's like makes the Nazis look fucking cuddly, man. I gotta say. Like, I don't even think the Nazis were killing indifferent people.
Yeah, and they were like, there was like one scene where they're like in a village. I think it's a village in East Timor. Maybe I'm wrong on the geography there. They're in one of the villages and they're describing like taking people from their home and basically lining them up and doing a witch hunt. But instead of a witch hunt, they're like trying to determine if they're communists or not. And if they showed any type of fear, they would just kill them.
Yeah.
But the thing was, they were doing public killing. So they'd like, okay, you're a communist, shot in the head. Then they go to the next side. Are you a communist? And, you know, of course he's afraid. Who's not going to be afraid? They just saw someone else killed right in front of them.
Yeah, even if you hadn't, like someone's holding a fucking gun to your face. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just absurd. That is like you said the word witch hunt. That is literally on board with the method of like, well, if she drowns, then we know she's not a witch. You know, it's fucking disgusting and ridiculous. Yeah, so this is what you're just describing there. That's in Argentina, right? Because it's kind of like Operation Condor seems to it begins like with Pinochet and in Chile, but this is also like extending into Argentina. It seems like, and yeah.
Yeah, so like...
Yeah, they're a part of like the Condor Alliance, I guess.
Yeah, they built upon the stay-behind armies Frank Wisner had helped to build in Europe to pursue their enemies in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Ireland. The men behind Operation Condor often considered the nonviolent democracy and human rights activists operating abroad to be even more dangerous than armed guerrillas at home. Most infamously, this logic led a U.S. citizen, known CIA contact and Condor operative Michael Townley to murder former Chilean Foreign Minister Orlando Letelier. We're having a problem with his last name too.
Yeah.
Letelier in the heart of Washington. He set off a car bomb on Embassy Row, which blew Orlando's legs off, killing him instantly. And it also injured his American assistant, Ronnie Moffat, who staggered from the car, slowly drowned, and she died. Sorry, and she slowly drowned in her own blood.
Yeah, she didn't just die; she slowly drowned in her own blood, man.
Yeah, but Townley, the guy who committed this crime, because he was, trying to protect the world from communism. He's in FBI witness protection.
Yeah. He you know what he witnessed? He witnessed this fucking horrendous murder that he committed. So he gets to be protected from what? Himself?
Yeah, he witnessed, performing an act of terror.
God fucking damn it.
Do you witness your own act, or do you just perform? Whatever.
I mean, obviously, I'm
yeah, no,
joke,
I got
but
it.
Like, yeah. Anyway, in the grand scheme of all this shit that is just in this chapter alone, that's probably like one of the more like, one of the least horrific things to happen. Just someone drowning in their own blood and another person having their legs blown off until they die. And that happened in America, in Washington, D.C. I just want to like underline that point. Yeah.
The next part of like this that goes to a character that's been in like other parts of the book named Ingyuk Tan. I think that's how you say her name.
Yeah,
But,
it's Chinese. Her family was from Indonesia, but they're Chinese descent, right? And they moved to Brazil. I think that's it.
She was accepted to the University of Sao Paulo, and which was like a huge accomplishment for her. I'm not going to stay on her too long, but apparently somehow her life just lined up to where she was affected by basically 4 different Jakarta movements, if you want to call them each like Jakarta operations, which is kind of interesting. Interesting, terrible. Interesting is probably the wrong word.
No, well, I mean, I know what you mean.
So, like, it goes on to say she didn't know it. Because, like, she didn't know it, but this was the 4th time that Washington's violent anti-communist campaign had affected her life personally. First, the U.S.-backed military, the nascent state within a state, had ignited anti-Chinese riots in her part of Indonesia, forcing her family to flee the country. Second, her family lived through Brazil's U.S.-backed military coup in 1964. And third, the mass murder in Indonesia demolished life for the relatives who had stayed home, and now one of her college buddies was the victim of Operation Condor, and that was her college buddy, Tupa.
What happened to him?
Yeah. So,
Just disappeared by the police or something?
Disappeared by the police for... They went to college together. He was a college kid who had leftist ideals.
Oh, wait, it says... he wasn't even like... It says he wasn't even particularly active or left-wing student, but it was because his father was a member of a Uruguayan left-wing group. So, it's like your dad was an old lefty like a couple years back, so we gotta slit your throat. Jesus Christ. Oh, we haven't even gotten to the drain the sea yet. I just remember like the I forget who says it. Some evil fucker is talking about like if communists are fish, like we just have to drain the entire sea, which is like that totally sums up like this like it sums up the the methodology of these anti-communist, or as I like to say, fascist purges of people.
Yeah,
I think it's
the gorilla is the fish, the people are the sea. If you cannot catch the fish, you have to drain the sea.
Yeah, so just kill everybody.
Yeah,
like, and that just I know you already said it, but like I think it's really important to emphasize that in Chile at least, like they're very clearly not going after mere communists or even like vaguely aligned leftists. It was like this was in Argentina. Going after Jews, atheists. You could be like a hardcore capitalist, but if you profess to not believe in God, you know, that's enough to get you disappeared as well.
It's also in the government, and not just like Argentina, but also Guatemala and some other places. The government began to kill like people en masse simply because of their ethnic backgrounds, entire ethnicities, whole tribes, complete villages were marked as either communist or liable to become communist. They were often people who had only a vague ideal of what Marxism even was, or the guerrilla groups were. This was new, different from the urban terror tactics in which government forces kidnapped individual people. So, like, they just start, like, going into, like, just the tribes, the rural areas, or, like, people who are living outside of the cities, just indigenous people, just killing them en masse. It's terrible.
Just burning down villages. There was one part I remember reading. It was like they would liquidate the village and then just torch it. and that was like every man, woman, child type of thing.
Yeah, they get into like sorry, I'm gonna skip forward a little bit, but they start talking about Benny, who I guess was one of the diplomats in the United States, right? He was a United States diplomat, or that thought he was.
No, he's
confused exactly
he's
what
the
he was.
He's the Chinese, Chinese, but in Indonesian of Chinese descent, I'm pretty sure, who went to school in like Kansas, like in America, and I forget. Does he become a diplomat?
I think he becomes a diplomat.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot to remember in this book.
Anyways, he starts to hear that, I guess from one of his Australian friends, who just came back from the Cambodian, or going back to Cambodian Thai border with like wild tales. There were Cambodians like stumbling out of the jungle, starving and collapsing on Thai soil. And this was right after the fall of Khmer Rouge. They were fleeing to whomever might help. Refugees in rags fleeing the country by the tens of thousands, often emaciated and barely able to walk, seemingly unable to speak or smile, and immediately sent a So Benny immediately sent a cable to New York that's like, please send me to Cambodia, because he wanted to go work there.
Oh, right. He has a lot of the first-hand accounts of Pol Pot.
Right, and I think like, see, I thought he was a diplomat because I thought he was like trying to like work with the U.S. government to be like, hey, we got to cut this stuff out. People are like being tortured. This is like clear violations of human rights, and he couldn't get anywhere with like Carter's administration because America is still, as he said. They hated Vietnam too much. They couldn't forgive them for winning the war. So even though, like, at this point, Vietnam's, like, really trying to help the situation in Cambodia, we refuse to do anything to help these people because we just can't get over our beef that we lost.
It's yeah. I mean, it's that, and also we just don't care. Like, it's not let's see yeah, that's what this part really interested me, actually, because sometimes when you hear like modern day people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about and be like, well, you know what socialism is, right? That's like Pol Pot, and that's like Mao, and it's like, okay, like nominally, yes, but guess who deposed Pol Pot? Vietnamese communists. America didn't go riding in there as the force of freedom and democracy. We were just fine with the killing fields in the Khmer Rouge, and mainly because we were trying to play nice with China, and China was strongly allied with Pol Pot. So when Vietnam like went in and just ended the Khmer Rouge regime,
and Vietnam Pol Pot also crushed the Chinese forces.
Yeah,
because they had a lot of practice fighting Americans and the French.
Exactly,
their military was solid.
Which was the thing and I mean, they say in the book that most people don't, or it says Chinese invasion of Vietnam in 1979 is often forgotten. And I never knew it, to be honest. But I
don't think I did either. I might have so a long time ago, I read a bad airport novel when I was in middle school about all this, fiction novel though, but I've forgotten so many details. Anyways, that doesn't matter. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, it's like, this is more like swept under the rug parts of history. I feel like is that
swept under the rug that the U.S. lost in Vietnam.
Yeah, that too. But like, but this whole idea of like, like people who, I already said it, but people who bring up Pol Pot as like, like What, you're gonna vote? You're gonna vote for Bernie Sanders? Are you some kind of Pol Pot? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, yes, Pol Pot was a fucking monster, and yeah, he did represent some form of communism, but it was like an authoritarian, like centrally, like dictatorially based, like Stalinism, and you don't have to agree with that to think that there's something to this socialism thing, or that maybe there's something wrong with capitalism and global capitalism as it's been practiced.
I apologize. So, when I was bringing up Benny, he's not a diplomat. He worked for the UN. That's what his deal was. He was working for the UN at the time. And he wanted, after his Australian friend told him what was going on at the Cambodian border, he went to see for himself, and that's when he says refugees in rags were fleeing the countries by tens of thousands, basically unable to speak or smile. And he had, I guess, Benny had sent a cable immediately to New York to say, hey, send me to Cambodia, because he wanted to go there and try to help the situation. But instead, he was sent to New York, where he had to witness something just as shocking, if not even worse. The United States, after all this, after Vietnam helped overthrow this regime that was
the Khmer
torturing,
Rouge,
killing people. Yeah, the United States chose to recognize the remnants of the Khmer Rouge at the United Nations, keeping its tiny regime alive and refusing to recognize the Vietnamese allied government. This would last for years. It was partly a way to appease Carter's new ally in Beijing, but Benny knew that it was something else too, which was what I was saying earlier. They hated Vietnam too much, Benny said. They couldn't forgive them for winning the war.
Sore losers. Oh, man.
And,
yeah, I think I remember something he was describing, like, yeah, there's like tens of thousands of Cambodians, like, just like collapsing, like right over the border in Thailand, like trying to get some kind of like refugee status. Yeah, like you said, like they're like starving and just like, that's what he saw. Yeah, that's what he saw with his own eyes.
Then, also, not only the United States, Indonesia also backed the Khmer Rouge. But now let's go back to Central America, where Jimmy Carter's government was tapping the brakes a bit on the brutal realpolitik in South America. Mainly because this was after like Watergate and the Church Committee investigation into the CIA and FBI. And the U.S. media was like less reflexively uncritical of Washington's covert and overt Cold War schemes abroad. Like suddenly the New York Times and Washington Post started like reporting on the massacres going on instead of sweeping them under the rugs. Too little, too late, I guess.
Also, I have to wonder how closely they tied the CIA to that, but that's a separate Google search. Because it says they reported on the massacre. They reported on the Guatemalan like regime that we installed.
I think a lot of the public had a major distrust in the government at this point because of Watergate and some stuff going on in the CIA. So they might have been reporting on it pretty accurately, but I'm not sure. I'd also have to Google search it.
I just know that they also like prop up imperialism in other ways. That's all I'm trying to say, I guess. But I sorry, I get your point. I see what you're saying. I see what the book is saying.
So yeah, he's tapping the brakes on South America, but sorry, I lost my train of thought. Why can't I talk today? Nicaragua. This also talks about in 79 how in Nicaragua, that's not right. Help me.
Nicaragua?
Yeah,
Like agua, like water.
Agua, thank you, Nicaragua. Nicaragua. I can't talk today. I don't. It's worse than normal. It's like my tongue is just getting tied on everything. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, this is 70.
So I'm just gonna say this is a small part, anyways. But
it's a very small part. But I want to bring it up. The 79, the Sandinistas took Manguala and set up a government in Nicaragua for leftists across Central America. This was a moment of effervescence, just as 1970 had been for Chilean socialists. They had not only won, they had gotten away with it. Even The Clash, the punk band over in England, sang ecstatically about the shocking development. You know that song. That song. Have you heard that song? I don't know if I've heard that song. I don't really listen to The Clash
I'm
much.
not sure.
I've heard them, yeah. So, what happens with this regime? Not regime.
In Nicaragua? I mean, pretty quickly, I mean, this isn't brought up in the book, but I mean, like, the entire decade of the 80s were spent with U.S., like, CIA trained and backed death squads just destroying the Sandinistas and anyone who was on their side remotely. I mean, that's the whole, yeah, the Contras, it was bloody. It was terrible, but like the Sandinistas are still in power today. And we were talking about this before we hit record, like, how right now, this very moment, like Washington is still spreading absurd propaganda about Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua and the Sandinista party, and they just had like free and fair elections like a week ago. But this is that's something we're probably going to talk about in later episodes anyway. So I'll leave it at that for now. But because we got some other shit to get through here.
Yeah, I mean, the book moves on to like Ilam, which is like a small village in the mountains of Guatemala, right? And Ilam is like just this small village that in the middle of nowhere that I guess suddenly who was it? Here it is. The small community of Ilam is nestled between misty mountains in northwest Guatemala, closer to the Mexican border than to the capital. The people are Mayan and speak Ixil, not Spanish, and for decades they had been either subsistent farming or working for pennies on a nearby ranch. The ranch, of course, was owned by a rich white man, and sat on the land taken from the Mayans a century ago. And over the years, it kept getting bigger and bigger, so the ranch is getting bigger. Anyways, Ilam is too far from Guatemala City to have been affected by the Jacoba Arbenz incipient land reform program in 1954. Residents barely even heard about the reforms that were snuffed out by the CIA. But all this changes in 1981, however, because global politics arrived in the village. First, the EGP, the Ejército Guerrilla de los Pobres, came to visit. Speaking Spanish, the guerrillas explained that they were on the Mayan side, that they were building a revolution that would help them get their land back, and they were fighting for them. They were nice to the villagers, these guerrillas. They were actually kind and, not that goofy. It's like, hey, we're going to help you get your land back. We're going to help restore what is yours. But it also drew the attention of the anti-communist. And not long after, the army sent men in pretending to be guerrillas. It didn't take long for the villagers to figure out what was going on. They figured out they weren't EGB, EGP, it didn't take long for them to figure out that the men's costumes were shoddy. They were even like wearing cheap, like fake beards, and they were acting all wrong. They were asking like too many questions, treating the villagers aggressively. The real guerrillas, this sounds funny to me, hadn't acted that way at all when they came. This was not a sophisticated undercover operation. They were clearly just some young military men trying to figure out who was most sympathetic to the rebels. But the military men, I think, had a hard time figuring out who was most sympathetic to the rebels because the village was smart enough to, keep their mouth closed when they realized something was fishy about these people. Not that it helped all that much, because in January 1982, the military men came back. This time they were wearing their army uniforms, but with black paint on their faces. They burst into people's homes. One of the people was Josefa, who was this woman, this poor woman, who I guess is one of the people he interviews, actually. It didn't surprise her that her family was on the list. Her father had been part of a small group that tried, back in the 70s, to ask the local government down in the nearest city to save their land.
Oh, communism. Shut it down. Kill it all.
Anyway, they dragged away her husband's father from their house. They smashed Josefa in the head with a rock. Then several of the soldiers shoved a napkin into her mouth and raped her. The day the military came in January 1982, all in all, 30 people were taken that day, never to return. A few days later, after Josefa had been raped, the soldiers came back and took her father and brother.
And
then, in February, the soldiers came again and took her other brother, who was working in a field. They lobbed a grenade at him and killed him. They took more people away that day, and this time they burned down the empty houses as they left. A young boy, Antonio Cabacaba, realized something was wrong that day when he came back from working in the fields. As he approached his home, he saw his mother standing in a doorway wearing the long red skirt worn by Mayan women in the region, staring blankly into the distance. He said, "What's wrong?" She told him about the fires. The soldiers had burned an old woman alive in her home as they left. Anyways, people in the village began discussing running, trying to escape, but there wasn't really anywhere to go. They could go into the mountains, but they'd run out of food. And this was the worst violence their community had ever experienced. They came to the conclusion, though, that it was finally over. It wasn't over. A month later, in March, the soldiers came back at 5 a.m. They woke up every person in Elam. They were wearing black paint again. The soldier said, "Come on, there's a town meeting, you're going." They told Antonio and Josefa and everyone else. They walked the villagers to the tiny town square. They sent the men into the little church behind the plaza and the women into the tiny outhouse next door. Antonio heard someone fidgeting on the radio, talking to the superior. He informed the superior, "We're going to kill the guerrillas." And one by one, then two by two, they brought men out of the church, stood them in front of the schoolhouse and shot them. I was talking about this earlier. Everyone could see each murder. That was clearly the point. After about 100 were dead, they stopped. One of the soldiers said, "We're only killing the ones that look guilty. The ones that look afraid." That's, much like we were talking about up there somewhere, the ones who look timid. Anyways, other villages outside of Elam, other small villages weren't so lucky. In many parts of this region, the military... Yeah, not so lucky. In many parts of the region, militarily simply killed every man, woman, and child. At least some people in Elam got to live, forced into sexual slavery or whatever horrible thing, but they lived. The government had decided that the Ixil were intrinsically communist. That they were communist by nature, yeah. Or at least very likely to become communist. In Indonesia, it may not have been the case that the mass murder was genocide. It was simply anti-communist mass murder. In Guatemala, it was anti-communist genocide.
Yeah, because they're just it's like it's just another excuse to kill indigenous people that are seen as kind of annoying because they want land. They want land that they were like, that is their birthright. But it's so pesky of them.
Of course. And this is around the same time that General Ephraim Rousmont took power in Guatemala in a military coup. I think he was backed by Reagan. Everyone loves Reagan. He was an evangelical Christian. God, I love those people. Which made him a special favorite of Ronald Reagan's. He continued the genocide in a slightly different fashion, right? So, he would herd ethnically suspect communities into model villages that they had built to help these people start new lives in suitably non-communist fashion. This actually, in a way, reminds me of how we treated Native Americans in the United States when we'd force them into take them away from their family and force them into schools.
Re-educate them, yeah.
Re-educate, yeah. I guess that's also what happened in Canada. It's a whole another thing.
But it's also this is just I don't even know how much re-education they're doing here as much as
these villages were just concentration camps.
Yeah, they're just, it's forced labor and just containment, basically. And I think a lot of it is about land usage.
But Mott had a justification. This was his justification, directly quoted. They are communist and therefore atheist, and therefore they are demons, and therefore you can kill them.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
Yeah, logical.
Man, this book is full of shit. These guys are all right in my book. In my book called the General Rios Montt method.
The vast majority of the murdered were practitioners of traditional Mayan religions.
Yeah.
Then we get back to what's happening in Josefa's small village of Elam, which is just I think there were other villages like this, but Josefa helped with the interviews and stuff, right? And so we focus on her village, but the residents were forced into slavery. They had to work for the military. The kid, Antonio, who had asked what was wrong, he was forced to join a militia and grew up fighting the guerrillas for the rest of the 80s. They rebelled quietly by intentionally missing when they shot at the enemy. These people that were forced into the military. Josefa, she quickly married, not out of love or anything. If she had not, she would have been forced to marry one of the soldiers, watching over the Alde Modella, which I think is basically the comfort women. Forced into sexual slavery like so many of her friends, had she married a soldier. So that's why she just married another friend in the village, I think. Their village, so she didn't have to be forced into sexual slavery. Their village was liquidated and eventually burned to the ground. And this was all part of Mott's strategy for fighting communism. And this was the quote you were talking about earlier, where he said, "The gorilla is the fish, the people are the sea." He said, "If you cannot catch the fish, you have to drain the sea." Right?
Yeah, I think he's quoting the Bible there. His favorite
Is
book.
that from the Bible?
No, man, of course not.
Oh shit. Sorry.
Yes, Jesus, infamous mass murderer.
Man, I don't fucking know what's in the Bible. I'm certain you know the book better than me for various reasons. Sorry.
I'm just saying this guy is the evangelical Christian, and he's saying
that sounds biblical to me. Sure,
he's saying the most disgusting shit. He's just justifying. It's not even. It's beyond genocide. It's just killing everyone. Just killing whoever you feel like indiscriminately. Well, not indiscriminately. It's pretty targeted, actually, but it's just completely fucked. Yeah, that's why I was saying. I was kind of telling you the other day. I think this chapter is like exhausting.
It's really
it's just like wall to wall. This kind of grimness, basically, and all around. Well, it focuses on at least East Asia, Southeast Asia, and like basically all of South America.
Yeah, it's super grim.
And
like it goes.
It's the same, but it's like again, it's like the same thing played out over and over again.
Over and over again, yeah. It ends just the part on what's I guess it continues to talk about the anti-communist extermination that was like spreading all over Latin America with the assistance of the United States, and this section ends with taking a death toll approaching. Taken together, the death toll approaches the estimated size of the 1965-66 massacres in Indonesia. Even the anti-communist great enemy, the supposed reason for all this terror, did not deploy this kind of violence. Using numbers compiled by the U.S.-funded Freedom House organization, historian John Coatsworth concluded from 1960 to 1990, the number of victims of U.S.-backed violence in Latin America vastly exceeded the number of people killed in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc over the same period of time.
Yeah, that's a significant fact.
So the fall, the Berlin Wall falls, right? And from 89 to 91, the Soviet Union fell apart spectacularly, along with all the states that Moscow directly established in the wake of World War II. The Second World War was no more. Its residents... the Second World, not the Second World War. The Second World was no more. Its residents experienced this as the literal collapse of their governments. For the rest of the planet, most of which had somehow been affected by Cold War, some things changed and some things did not. America was the winner. We watched triumphantly. We were vindicated. We had persuasive evidence that communism was not a sustainable system. Yay. And in parts of the Third World, most specifically the regions where the Cold War was still being fought, there was some relief. Benny was able to finally triumph at the UN. He had been lobbying for years to get the U.S. to stop recognizing Khmer Rouge as Cambodia's official government and trying to tell the world about the horrors inflicted by Pol Pot. Benny was influential in getting enough countries on board to end the diplomatic impasse between Washington's stubborn opposition to Hanoi. In 1992, he moved to Siem Reap, the most chaotic part of the country, to try to help put together a new UN-coordinated coalition government. Then it goes on to what's happening in El Salvador. A truce was finally allowed. The rebels simply became a legal party. A lot of historians suspect that probably could have happened long before if fanatical anti-communism had not led Washington to block any possibility of negotiations. A lot of these places would probably been like very peaceful had we just allowed negotiations between the leftists and the conservatives, right? We made it violent. In Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, as we were talking earlier, they won the 84 election. Washington told the right-wing opposition not to participate, because they wanted to make it look like they won by cheating, since the Reagan administration did not want the vote to appear real.
Legitimate?
Right? Yeah, sorry, man. I'm having a hard time today. The Contras never stopped their terrorism. It was clear to everyone as the country went to the polls again in 1990 that violence would not stop until the leftists lost power. And somehow, the violence that the conservatives were causing. They never ran out of money to perform the violence. I wonder why. It's almost like they had backers. Who could it be? And so in Afghanistan, hey, we finally got out of Afghanistan, right? Successfully, even. In Afghanistan, where Soviet troops had been trying to prop up a communist ally for 9 years, Moscow's forces retreated. That's good. Finally, Moscow's out of Afghanistan. And the CIA-backed Islamist fundamentalists... No, the CIA wouldn't back those people. Would they?
No way.
Set up a fanatical theocracy, and the West stopped paying attention. Good, because Afghanistan is just a place we've ignored ever since.
Yeah, a little man named Osama bin Laden, who we'd never hear from again, was left to roam free with all of his U.S. purchased weapons and cash.
I guess in Chile, Pinochet had been removed from power by national plebiscite in 1988, but he remained army commander-in-chief until 1998.
Yeah, I knew it was in the 90s. Like he essentially still was in power.
And he also became a senator for life. And the
democracy.
The two biggest anti-communist governments ever set up in the former Third World. At the end of the Cold War had an indirect effect on them. Both Brazil and Indonesia transitioned from authoritarian rule to multi-party democracy. They did so at different times. Brazil started the process well before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Suharto left power almost a decade after it fell. Crucially, however, they both did it the same way. In Brazil and Indonesia, the transition from military dictatorship was carried out in a controlled manner. They negotiated transfers of power, both maintained power and maintained the fundamental social structure the dictatorships were set up to protect, and provided impunity for the rulers who remained wealthy and influential. They just wanted to make sure the elites didn't lose their money. The elites who felt threatened by social movements in the 50s and 60s remained in charge, and the countries were well integrated into the global capitalist system. Good. This was the case in almost every country in South Latin America and the vast majority of Southeast Asia. In different ways and to varying degrees, fanatical anti-communism remained a powerful force in both countries and in the surrounding regions. It certainly did not leave the earth when the Soviet threat disappeared. I mean, the anti-communism power. Anyways, Washington never changed its stance towards Cuba, which we were talking about, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Instead of moderating pressure on Havana or trying a different tactic, what did Washington do? We clamped our hand over them and squeezed them as tight as we could. By passing the Helms-Burton Act in 1992 and penalizing all companies doing business with Cuba. Yay. Wasn't that act part of what was making it so hard for them to get needles to give out their vaccines when they had made a vaccine?
I don't know if it's the same thing, but it's the same idea.
Same principle, okay. But Cuba's remained resilient. Castro buckled down and the island made it through a so-called special period marked by deprivation worse than it had seen since the 1950s by reintroducing capitalism and relying on tourism. It's hard to explain U.S. behavior toward Cuba as a response to the fear of Soviet communism, or as a defense of freedom. From 1960 to present, Cuba was very far from the most repressive political system or the worst violator of human rights in the hemisphere. Perhaps Cuba had committed the unforgivable sin of very publicly surviving repeated coup and assassination attempts in a way that embarrassed Washington. Or perhaps the real threat Washington perceived was the possibility of a rival model outside the global American-led system. The same thing that we now know bothered U.S. officials about Guatemala in 1954, Bandung in 1955, and Chile in 1973.
Yeah, all of those perhapses make sense to me. I think it's probably a combination of them.
And the last thing I really marked in my notes was immediately after the end of the Cold War, this U.S. official, President George H.W. Bush, talked about the peace dividend, which I remember even as a kid. The idea was that with the Soviet communism gone, Washington could cut back on military spending and violent foreign engagements. That happened. Totally. There was a small decrease in spending in the 90s.
Wait. You just skipped a sentence. That's important.
No, there was a small... There's a sentence before there was a small decrease in spending in the 90s?
Yeah, the exact opposite happened.
Oh, shit. I completely... my eyes just had a real hard time focusing on that. Oh, that is there. Huh. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, of course the military budget just keeps bloating and...
It decreased for a small minute. Just a little bit in the 90s. Then the Pentagon's budget exploded again after the turn of the century. Barack Obama ran as an anti-war candidate. That's part of why I voted for him the first time. But when he finished his term in 2016, the United States was actively bombing at least 7 countries, and I think our military budget has just went up and up and up and up since the late 90s, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of where it ends and into the north, I think. The rest of it is basically talking to survivors and how even the people that survived this and know America was responsible, they're sending their children to America because they have nowhere else to send them, and that they just kind of grin and bear it, right? It's like the famous Bali Small, or just these people have suffered and there's literally nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, I think it was the kid who came home and heard about the old woman being lit on fire.
Yeah,
in the
Antonio Cabacaba
in that village in Guatemala. This chapter ends with him saying, "I guess it's funny. Well, maybe funny isn't the word, but we know who is responsible for the violence that destroyed this place. We know it is the United States that was behind it, but we keep sending our kids there because they have nowhere else to go." And there's a quote from a historian towards the end here, who says, just an overview of the Cold War, right? In a historical sense, and especially as seen from the South, the Cold War was a continuation of colonialism through slightly different means. The new and rampant interventionism we have seen after the Islamist attacks on America in September 2001 is not an aberration, but a continuation in a slightly more extreme form of U.S. policy during the Cold War. And the author sums it up even more succinctly. It says, the past 2 decades have led to the best historians to take a wider view of U.S. behavior. Before and after the Cold War, the United States was always an expansionist and aggressive power. I feel like a big thing we could walk away from this book with is that the cold part of Cold War is extremely misleading. There were what you can only describe as hot wars all around the fucking globe at the behest of America. The only difference is we weren't sending our boys over there anymore. So no one cared. We didn't have to declare war officially with Congress, so nobody fucking knew. If people did find shit out, about the Contras in the 80s, people would quickly forget and not give a shit. It's oh, whatever, it's just one of those shithole countries. They probably fucked themselves up. We're probably trying to give them freedom, right? I don't know. Who cares? Give me a beer. That's just that's the kind of the attitude I feel is But then when you look into the reality of these situations and you realize that U.S. intelligence and funding and the all the way to the fucking president himself is like intentionally destabilizing places and destroying democracies as an excuse to carry out mass murder as just another element of maintaining U.S. hegemony, I guess, over more and more and more. It's upsetting. And people don't want to know. People just don't want to know. People don't want to know. And sometimes when you talk to my fellow Americans about this kind of stuff, they you can just see this pained look on their face of stop telling me this, or it's that can't be true. You're just a loony leftist conspiracy theorist. But it really a lot of this stuff is just in on record, on our own records, in the CIA cables. It's there, and not even, and because it's stuff that happened so long ago, quote unquote, even though relatively it's not that long ago, and we still basically are doing a lot of this. At the very least, we're still constantly interfering with democratic elections in South America, for example, and demanding they go in different directions than the people want them to be in. I don't know. I just got lost in my own sentence there, but
yeah, it's so bleak. That whole chapter.
Well, I'll quickly try to summarize chapter 11 here. Because I know we don't have much time left, but chapter 11, we are the champions, and this is kind of taking a little more of a wider view, I guess, again, of the Cold War and who won, who are the winners and who were the losers during all of this, and it also talks about how the author he goes more into first person, so he's talking about himself traveling around the world and interviewing these people that he got a lot of this information for the book from. And let's see, he says, what kind of world did we get after the Cold War? Who won this war? Who lost? And more specifically, how did the Anticommunist Crusade concretely affect life for billions of people today? These questions were in the back of my head as I traveled the world reporting this book. I had been raised with a certain set of answers to the questions. To say that what I learned since I started working on this project shook my faith in those answers would be a severe understatement. But rather than just reformulate the answers myself, I wanted to hear from the people who'd lived through this and felt the conflict most intimately. And he said, for these people, the answer was usually quite simple. The United States won. Here in Indonesia, you got what you wanted, and around the world, you got what you wanted. It was this was an Indonesian guy speaking. Winarso, the head of Secretariat Bersama, 1965. This is this very tiny organization advocating for the survivors of the massacres in Indonesia. And he goes on to say, the Cold War was a conflict between socialism and capitalism won. Moreover, we all got the U.S.-centered capitalism that Washington wanted to spread. Just look around you, he said, gesturing to his city and the entire Indonesian archipelago around him. How did we win? I asked. You killed us. Answers like that were very common. The people I met were not a random selection of the world's population. These were mostly the victims of and experts on anti-communist mass murder programs of the 20th century. There are important other viewpoints out there, but I'm convinced that the perspectives like Winarso and the experiences of people like Francisca and Carmen and Ingyok and Sakono are crucial to understanding how our world turned out. And he goes on to say a few more interesting things, quite a few more, but I'm going to just cut to the very end here where he lists the 5 ways in which the anti-communist frenzy of the Cold War, the murderous frenzy of the Cold War, has shaped the world we live in today. So first, simply there is trauma, which is mostly unresolved. Countries like Chile and Argentina did a fairly good job of coming together for national reconciliation. Brazil did a worse job, and Indonesia did absolutely nothing of the kind. But even in the best case scenario, it's obvious you cannot simply delete the scars of mass terror in a generation or two. The psychological effects of U.S. covert action are felt everywhere, including in North America. More and more citizens there have connections to countries touched by recent U.S. interventions, and even for white Americans, there are psychological effects. When people find out that some things, important things, have been hidden from them, they start to doubt things they shouldn't and embark on wild conspiracy theorizing. The second thing is that Washington's violent anti-communist crusade destroyed a number of alternative possibilities for world development. The Third World Movement fell apart partly because of its own internal failures, but it was also crushed. These countries were trying to do something very, very difficult. It doesn't help when the most powerful government in history is trying to stop you. And then he goes on to kind of speculate like how things could have turned out if the U.S. hadn't, created right-wing death squads to kill millions of people. And it's just, I mean, this is like into more depressing territory because it's just trying to imagine like, it still would have been a struggle, like he said.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help when, America's number one superpower puts its boot on your tiny little third world neck and then says, stop hating yourself, and like grabs your hand. Stop stabbing yourself, stop skinning yourself, stop burning yourself, stop electrocuting your own genitals. Third, the operations profoundly affected the nature of the regimes and economic systems set up in their wake. Indonesia and Brazil are perhaps the two crucial examples. It's now probably broadly accurate to say that all of Latin America, with the exception of Cuba, consists of crony capitalist nations with powerful oligarchies. Yep. And it's largely the same in Southeast Asia, he goes on to say, especially in Indonesia and the Philippines, where the Jakarta method, obviously, that it was carried out in Indonesia, but was also in the Philippines as well. The fourth way is that these anti-communist extermination programs, their legacy is that they deformed the world socialist movement. Many of the global left-wing groups that did survive the 20th century decided that they had to employ violence and jealously guard power or face annihilation. When they saw the mass murders taking place in these countries, it changed them. Maybe U.S. citizens weren't paying close attention to what happened in Guatemala or Indonesia, but other leftists around the world definitely were watching. When the world's largest communist party without an army or dictatorial control of a country was massacred one by one with no consequences for the murderers, many people around the world drew lessons from this with serious consequences. This was another very difficult question I had to ask my interview subjects, especially the leftists from Southeast Asia and Latin America. When we would get to discussing the old debates between peaceful and armed revolution, between hardline Marxism and democratic socialism, I would ask, who was right? In Guatemala, was it Arbenz or Che who had the right approach? In Indonesia, when Mao warned Aidit that the PKI should arm themselves, and they did not. Wait. Well, anyway, I think I have a typo in my notes here or something. Anyway, I remember that part. Mao said, like, you guys should get guns to the Indonesian Communist Party, and they didn't want to. They wanted like a peaceful democratically driven revolution, and they were killed in the upward of 1 million people. In Chile, was it the young revolutionaries in the MIR who were right in those college debates, or the more disciplined, moderate Chilean Communist Party? Most of the people I spoke with who were politically involved back then believed fervently in a nonviolent approach and gradual, peaceful, democratic change. They often had no love for the system set up by people like Mao, but they knew that their side had lost the debate because so many of their friends were dead. They often admitted without hesitation or pleasure that the hardliners had been right. The PKI's unarmed party didn't survive. Allende's democratic socialism was not allowed, regardless of the détente between Soviets and Washington. Looking at it this way, the major losers of the 20th century were those who believed too sincerely in the existence of a liberal international order, those who trusted too much in democracy or too much in what the United States said it supported rather than what it really supported, what the rich countries said rather than what they did. That group was annihilated. And finally, the fifth consequence of the crusade, fanatical anti-communism has never really left us, even in the first world. Not only in Brazil and Indonesia in the past few years, it has become clear that this violent, paranoid style in politics remains a very potent force. Which, then we get into chapter 12. It's kind of more sort of...
Yeah, it kind of goes over where his different contacts, I guess the people he talked to for the book, where they are, what they're doing now, what's happening now, right?
Yeah, like where are they now, basically. And I was just going to say, because that fifth consequence about like fanatical anti-communism is still around. Bolsonaro is like, I think like a perfect example, because he says shit like that in public. He just says we need to kill more leftists. Like he says that all the time. Like and gay people as well. We need to
go back to the old ways. It's sort of like the I forgot his name all of a sudden. Who's the guy that's president of the Philippines? He's sort of the same way too.
I always forget, or I never have remembered how to pronounce his name the right way, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he said that every drug addict should be shot in the head. Yeah, he's a lunatic as well. Yeah, and yeah, it's not a accident that the Philippines like went under this same anti-communist purging process in the 60s as well, or the 70s, I think. But I know we've got very little time left, but like
I liked this quote about Bali in chapter 12, one that says, if aliens from another world landed on Bali, they would immediately conclude that our planet has a racial hierarchy. The white people who come here for vacation are orders of magnitude wealthier than the locals who serve them. It is just accepted as a natural part of life almost everywhere in Southeast Asia. White people have the disposable income to buy lavish hospitality or sex from the locals. They were born with this wealth. Compared to the rest of Indonesia, Bali has done okay for itself economically as a result of the tourism, and Balinese people often obediently reproduce the Bali small as they get Australian surfers their eggs or Russian Instagram models their coconuts. I liked that bit.
Yeah.
It seemed to ring a bit true to me.
Yeah. I mean, I've been like, I got, since moving to Korea, I've got to travel a little bit. I've said this, I still want to go to Indonesia. But I hate the fact that it's like, it's tricky though, because it's like, I hate those resorts, right? I hate seeing them. I hate seeing these like disgustingly overly wealthy people. And they're not just white people. They're people from, they're Koreans. They're people from just first world countries.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's why I didn't. I've been to Thailand once and I really disliked it because it felt like the worst example of that I've seen anywhere that I've been.
Yeah, it's like that in the Philippines. I mean, I've been to the Philippines, and my whole thing was like, I mean, I didn't make a big thing of it. I mean, number one, I can't afford to go to a fucking like resort place anyway.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't want to, even if I could. Honestly, I mean, I'm not just trying to be like some fucking like hip cool person or whatever.
I went to one for free in Jeju. That was fun because it was free.
Yeah.
Like I wanted a little trip. I didn't really want
Jeju, another place where there were like tens of thousands of people killed for being quote unquote communists. But I'm saying like it's for this reason, for the paragraph you just read, that like, I mean, that's what I feel gross about, like and so when I did go to like Nepal, like, and I wasn't consciously like, oh, I'm gonna stay like only in the cheapest places. That was me just literally like great. I think I was broke by the time I got back from that trip. But like
that happens.
But I did, and like and it was that thing of like, I feel like I'm having a more authentic experience. I did get to like meet like people and speak to them as regular human beings instead of as servants. But then the inner conflict in me is that these resort places, they do sort of boost the local economy, even though people still are like impoverished, but they would be even worse off without that tourism and without those like fancy resorts. So it's just like this, it's this shitty bind to be in, like not for me, but for the people who live in these places.
No, I understand.
Well, I mean, and for me in an ideological sense, because I can't just be like, fuck these places, they shouldn't exist, because like obviously they are helping people, but I still hate what it represents. And anyway, yeah, I just got to thinking about that. Yeah, he basically kind of like recaps like all of our kind of like main characters, like Ingyuk and Magdalena and
Benny.
Francesca, Benny. Sorry, not Francisca and Sakono. And then I think towards the end, the last person he talks to, I want to say, yeah, in Amsterdam, he visits Francisca.
Francesca, right?
And
she's like 94 and still doing activism work.
Oh wait, that's not. I was trying to remember where there's the part about Bolsonaro. Isn't that in this chapter? Fuck.
I don't. Maybe.
I thought it was at the very end of the book, but maybe my memory is just wrong. Oh, here it is. Well, yeah, it's the part where they're in Brazil. Okay, and yes, he's meeting with Ingyuk. She still lives in Brazil. She's still like a active, like politically active leftist, protesting Bolsonaro like all the time, like not just the times when like the masses come out. Like she's like on a daily basis kind of thing, and like getting into like nearly like coming to blows type arguments with like fucking like these actual fascists that you know that worship Bolsonaro. And there was something about Bolsonaro here I wanted to mention. Oh, because yes, he is maybe one of the most clear examples in the present day, like I already said, of an actual fascist in power who would easily use the Jakarta method again if given the ability to, I guess. And I guess that's all I wanted to say about that. I guess there's nothing to read from it, but I don't know. How did you feel about the book overall?
I thought it was interesting. I didn't know a lot of this part of history, even though I've actually heard Bevins in an interview, I think in 2 different places, other podcasts. But yeah, I feel like this stuff isn't talked about much, so it's good to be out there. Times it made me worry. What if this starts happening again? Like
yeah,
mass scale.
And I think that's kind of why I'm bringing up Brazil. Like that's where I guess I should be keeping an eye on. Although it's like, what the fuck am I going to do about it? But but like,
that's true.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious how the election is going to go. I think it's coming up pretty soon. And Lula, which is like was once like the popularly elected socialist politician, is I guess running again. And Bolsonaro, like very much like Trump, like kind of like refuses to like have like a real fair debate. And yeah, is people are speculating that he's going to try some sort of like January 6th-esque, but probably much more like planned type of coup, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, I really liked this book a lot. Like, as much as it was like the content was dark, it was like fun is such the wrong word, but I'm just gonna say it was like fun to read because it was just like it had like a really like propulsive narrative. Like, even though it's like, okay, I'm these are real people. This isn't just some fucking movie or some novel. But like, I guess I'm just trying to say, on top of how like the information being important, I thought it was well written and like well organized and paced and stuff. I never found myself bored really at all. And I both listened to the audio book, which is on YouTube, by the way. And then so I would like mostly just listen and then go back and read and take out the notes after that. But when I was just like walking around Seoul listening to these like stories of this like history spanning the globe, like, I don't know, it was riveting. It was I mean, you can enjoy reading shitty, like, about horrible stuff, right? I mean, that's not that crazy.
Yeah, sure.
I just I feel reluctant to put it in those words because, like, the stuff we just read today was so fucking grim, especially. But anyway, we should probably get wrapped up here.
Yeah.
I'd like to quickly. You know what? I'm gonna save this recommendation for next episode, and I'm just gonna recommend Jakarta Method. Do you want to recommend something?
I'll also recommend Jakarta Method because I did like it. It's a good book. There's a ton of information in a very short package for reading or listening to.
Yeah, I'll go
listened and read.
I'll go more specifically and say that since it's not too uncommon these days for people who used to like reading a lot to read a lot less than they used to, because the internet has wormed its way into our brains or whatever. But if you just search Jakarta Method on YouTube, there's a good audio version of it you can listen to. So yeah. All right. I feel weirdly exhausted.
Me too.
By the content and just we've been talking for a while, but
yeah. This is Heat Death Pod. Find us at heatdeathpod.com, and sometimes we're called Heat Death of the Universe. We have a Patreon. If you want to support our Patreon, please do. It helps us get by. It helps us pay for the podcast. I always forget our fucking slogan.
Oh,
break even. We want to break even.
We're just trying to break even over here. Feel free to hear that in the stereotypical New York voice.
We'll be back.
All right.
I guess.
See ya next week. Yeah.
See ya.
All right.
Okay, I'll send you this, Josh, here soon.
All right.
I think.
All right. Take it easy, man. See ya.
Yeah.
No
The first voice recording was made in 1860. It was a 10-second fragment of the French folk song Au clair de la lune recorded by inventor Edward Leon Scott de Martinville. But who will make the final voice recording and when? What will it be? Who will hear it?